Welcome, and thanks for listening. Tonight we're off to State College, Pennsylvania, on the campus of Penn State to speak with Professor Jeremy David Engels of the Communication Department. He has a new book out called On Mindful Democracy, a Declaration of Interdependence to Mend a Fractured World. Yes, interdependence, not independence. And that change in rhetoric is crucial. And it's a needed reminder to people of both political parties here in the United States that we share more than what divides us. And the book is filled with many practical tips and insights that we can use to revitalize our democracy. And it's a book that I think that Professor Engels' teacher, the late Nobel Prize winning laureate Thich Nhat Hanh, would be proud of and approve, and embodies many of Thich Nhat Hanh's concepts of interbeing. And we're very honored to have Professor Engels here on the show. Well, Professor, I see you brought the bedhead with us today.
I did. Yeah, it's in full bloom.
Are you ready to get all interdependent with Professor Lynn and I?
I can't wait. That's fantastic. It's great to be here.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how you would want to start off on this. My background is in law, and Lynn's is in psychology. So it's kind of like we're coming at you two different directions. Do you have a sense of which direction you'd like to start off with, or do you want me to just hit you with the law?
Yeah, just wherever you want to go. I'm excited. I mean, that's one of the really joyful things about having a book come out, and you get to have conversations with people from different backgrounds and different perspectives. And so I'm excited to see what your questions are.
Well, what really I thought was brilliant about the book is sort of its retranslation of the Declaration of Independence, which of course is a legal document, and it's just really interesting that you kind of updated that, where and I actually was reading the original Declaration of Independence.
Mm-hmm.
It's all about dissolving political bonds, establishing individual rights. So it's all about separation, in a way, as separating us from a whole. But it seems to be you're going in like the opposite direction of bringing things back together. So completing the circle from where we started, perhaps.
Yeah. I wrote, so my PhD is in rhetoric and, the study of the power of language. And I wrote a big part of my dissertation about the Declaration of Independence and my first book as well. And so it's a text that I studied in a lot of detail. And you're absolutely right that it's a document of separation, like you said. It's a document that is declaring a break, a fundamental political, economic, social break between two countries. And it does that through, what I call the language of enemyship. That word is a word that Thomas Paine coined in his 1776 book, Common Sense. And he was describing how the 13 colonies didn't really have a lot in common. They were very different. But what they shared was an enemy. So they weren't friends. They didn't really have friendship, but they had enemyship. They had this mutual enemy. And, initially I thought that was kind of funny, reading Common Sense. I was like, that's clever. But it seems like that actually is one of the dominant ways that we're conditioned, that we're taught to live politics, to live life, is building fragile communities in opposition to shared enemies. And so I thought it would be really interesting in this year of the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence to reimagine the text, not as a text of separation, not as a text of enemyship, but instead as a text of connection, a text of community building, a text of interdependence, a text of friendship. And as a rhetoric professor, I challenged myself to keep the same number of words, which I did, of the original, and to keep the same general structure as the original, um, but to really change the focus to what it felt like we needed more of today, which I think is that interdependence that cuts across difference.
Right. So, what does your practice of mindfulness and have to do with that? How does that filter into the equation?
Yeah. So I've been practicing mindfulness for a long time. I started when I was a teenager, and it was in part because I grew up with really severe asthma. And I still have asthma. It's much better under control than it was when I was younger, and treatments are a lot better now than they were. Um, but I was looking for ways that I could calm and settle, that didn't involve going to the hospital and getting a breathing treatment or something like that. And that really set me on the journey towards studying meditation. And I've studied it in many different varieties. I've studied in India and Europe, and mindfulness is really the practice that has been the one that I come back to the most often. And a really simple way to think of mindfulness, you all know what like a snow globe is, right? I When I travel around, I'll often like bring one with me. And so like you shake up a snow globe and you can't see anything because there's all the snow that's going in that snow globe. And I think our minds are like that most of the time. They're just so busy. There's so much going on. Thoughts are flying in and out of the mental headspace, and there's so many feelings present, and it's a lot, and it's really difficult to see things clearly when we're in that state. And so mindfulness is like setting the snow globe down and allowing all the stuff that's been kicked up to settle. And once things settle, it's possible for us to see things a little more clearly, um, to pause before responding to what's going on around us so that maybe we can respond differently than we would if we hadn't paused. And so that practice of mindfulness, I think, is essential to democracy, really. And I've found that from 20 years of teaching my students how to be more compassionate citizens and civic leaders, that they're better able to handle the challenges of citizenship. And those challenges are, pretty substantial. If they learn some of these techniques in school, techniques of being able to settle, to slow, to be more present, to listen more fully, to listen more deeply, to listen more compassionately, to speak more from the heart. And so I think mindfulness is essential in that way, but mindfulness is also one of many pathways to recognizing interdependence. And it's not the only one. There are many meditative, spiritual, religious, and also scientific, ecological pathways that can lead us to not just understanding interdependence on an intellectual level, which is fine, but actually feeling it in our breath, feeling it in our steps and in our bodies. And I think that's the more expansive sense of mindfulness that I really speak to in the book. Of mindfulness is a way for us to embrace and embody interdependence in our very beings.
Yeah, you want to explain interdependence a little bit, and I'm assuming that's coming from your teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, and that was it. I don't know if he created it, but he certainly made it popular, perhaps.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the words that I think that he coined, as far as I know, is the word interbeing. And he told this really great anecdote, where he was in California, I think in the 1980s, and he was giving a meditation workshop, and he was talking about the nature of a table and how, like, a table is made up of non-table stuff, basically. And when you think about like what makes up a table, there's wood, there's nails, probably there's probably glue, but there's also probably blueprints that went into designing the table, and then there's also someone's labor that helped to build that table, and put it together and put it in the place where it happens to be. And he was saying that if you took any one of those parts of a table out of the table and returned it back to its source, the table would no longer exist. So if you took the wood out, there's no table. But if you took the sunlight out, there would be no tree, which would be there would be no wood, and there would be no table, and there would be no carpenter. And everything is bound up together. So we tend to live a life where we experience things through a lens of separation or independence. And independence is a worthy goal in many ways. But fundamentally, everything is interdependent. And so Thich Nhat Hanh talked about how, he was trying to coin a word that would capture that essence of the fact that things are made up of things other than themselves. And ultimately, he settled on the word interbeing. And, a declaration of interbeing doesn't quite rhetorically capture and echo the original in the way that interdependence does. And so interdependence is one of the synonyms that's often given for interbeing. And so I think that people who know Thich Nhat Hanh's work will definitely hear the echoes of that in the book. And it really is that idea that we as human beings, our lives are made up of this complicated tapestry of things that we don't usually consider to be us. Um, so me is also not me, or I is also not I. There is no me without sunlight. There is no me without the earth. There is no me without the rain. There is no me in the way that I am right now without an alphabet or a language. And so beginning to wake up to those connections, I think, provides an opportunity for us to, I don't know, experience our lives in slightly different ways than we're accustomed to.
How would you say that interbeing or interdependence um, can be practiced in the context of democracy? Or I think one of your insights is lotus flowers do not grow alone.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so could you maybe bring this where the rubber hits the road on, say you're a political activist
Mhm.
or just or not just a citizen. Um, how can interbeing connect you with um, what you're revisioning democracy to be, or revitalizing it? I think in a way, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that, we're conditioned, I would say, educated, to experience democracy today as this thing that happens every, maybe 2 years, every 4 years during election season. And it's this battle between political parties for votes and for influence. And, our role as citizens is really very minimal, actually, is just to go and vote. And that is important. I want vote. Please, everyone vote. But that's a really bare, minimal, disempowering definition of democracy. And so, drawing on different traditions that very much come out of the American experience, in the book, I redefine democracy as a communal practice of working together. So it's something that we do together in community it's a practice. So it's something that we cultivate. It's something that we build. It's something we can get better at. Um, Communal practice of working together to care for ourselves, each other, and the life that we share. Um, and I think that the insight of an engaged Buddhist practice, the insight of an engaged mindfulness practice, is that it's not enough to just care for our own suffering, for our own pain, because that suffering is shared. And so, actually, if I care for your suffering and your pain as a neighbor, as a fellow citizen, as a friend, as a stranger, that's also a way of caring for my own suffering because you will be less likely to inflict that suffering on me. And if we together care for our suffering, we will be less likely to inflict that suffering on others. And so these kind of expansive circles of care radiate outwards. And that's one of the ways that I would encourage people to think about democracy is that it's not something that we do as individuals. It's very much rooted in our individual experiences, but it's something that we do together. And you mentioned the lotus flower example. I love that so much. I had the chance to visit Vietnam in 2023 to travel to Thich Nhat Hanh's root temple, and um, and there are all of these bomb craters from the American warplanes that you walk by while you're there, and in several of them, they've filled up with water since then, and lotus flowers are growing. Um, and it's amazing to see these lotus flowers growing in bomb craters, but it's also amazing to see how they grow together. Um, and I think that that can become a metaphor for us of how, by building community, we can blossom together. And so, like specific examples, the last part of the book really is full of specific things we can do to live democracy, to build a more democratic world. Um, and we could definitely talk about some of those, but they're very much in that last part of the book. Um,
Yes, and this is Um, and this is I'm looking at the part of the book called "Practice Democracy with Hands and Heart."
yeah,
The to pause and to ask, "Are you sure?" Mindful actions affirm and awaken. The true power of words is mending. Hatred has no place in democracy. I mean, each one is sort of a separate declaration, as it were, perhaps, or practice.
yeah, yeah. And I think that one thing that we we can do, and it's a small change, but it's one that I think is incredibly powerful. I've seen it be really powerful in communities that I lead or participate in. Instead of acting against, can we act for? So, what is it that we stand for? What is it that we would like to see? What is it about the world that we would like to cultivate? We would like more, I don't know, more freedom, more connection, more joy, whatever it is. I think so much of politics today is oppositional. It's against. I'm against this person. I'm against this thing. And that against logic really naturally creates a kind of enemyship. Um, Whereas, there are all of these great studies that have shown, the Kettering Foundation had one that was published not too long ago that talked about how people who disagree, if they come together and actually talk as human beings face to face, they'll see each other in a new light and they'll see those disagreements in a new light, not as something that turns us into enemies that must be defeated, but opens up the space for seeing each other as human beings. So I think we need a lot more of that. And of course, that's going to require institutional, like spaces to do that. But the opportunity, I think, is there for that.
Yeah. And with the technology, I'm imagining that, so much of you hear that the internet is criticized for everybody's in their own little
Yeah.
thought bubble that is all sharing the same mode of looking, but yet it could be expanded to allow that. But then it's not face to face.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was, I can't help thinking. I was driving through southern. This kind of touches on a couple things. One is that sort of I live in sort of a sheltered comfort life, and I don't understand probably the suffering that's going on with a lot of people and why they're thinking the way they do. But I was driving through southern Missouri with a college professor,
Uh-huh.
and we passed one house, and this was probably been 6 years ago during when the prior election was going on, and there were signs, and there was a sign up on the hill for the Democratic candidate, and at a very well tailored house, very prosperous, mowed lawn, white picket fence, immaculately gardened. And then we kept going, and just down the hill was this other house with the opposite that signs out for the opposite candidate with dilapidated cars in the front yard. And this is rural Missouri, so I mean there weren't any sort of zoning regulations, but dilapidated cars in the front yard. And I'm not going to throw the college professor on the bus, but there was a comment about, oh, that's kind of, well, no wonder, that's why, that candidate's getting that. And I kind of had the reaction. It's like there seemed to be so much more. I don't know. I was just kind of moved
Yeah.
this whole thing, because in my mind, what was going on in that other house where a person was, scraping by, living, and I'm speculating, but let's just assume that's the case, because, it was a trailer with dilapidated cars out the front. And, and I was thinking this person is actually, living something vital, not some sheltered thing that I'm living in and can pontificate about, treating everybody equally and blah, blah, blah. But, this is real life right here. I mean, this person, so I don't know where that leads me about intervening, but literally, you know, this is like right next to each other,
Hmm.
and they're breathing the same air and drinking the same water. And I don't know. I'll stop. But it just was. It just, even though this happened 6 years ago, it really questioned. It really put a pause in sort of my whole political. Um Sort of a humility and sort of how I
Mm.
look at this.
There's a really great Democratic philosopher whose name was John Dewey. He was a very important figure in the 20th century, and he wrote a book called "The Public and Its Problems." It was published 99 years ago, so next year will be the 100th anniversary of it. And it's a book I often teach to both undergrads and grad students. And at the very end of the book, he has this just beautiful, beautiful sentence where he says that the person whose shoe pinches knows best that it pinches and where it pinches, even if the expert shoemaker knows how to remedy it. And I think that so many of us right now have shoes that pinch, and it feels like they pinch in different ways. Or maybe we don't even realize that our neighbors or our friends, shoes are pinching. But we do not have a political system, politics, a democracy that is responsive to that at all. Um, I mean, I think that people's shoes are pinching and no one is listening to them. Um, and they don't know what to do about it. And so that creates a very volatile and, I mean, it's one of the ingredients for authoritarian rule. Not the only one, but one of them. And it doesn't have to go that direction, but it can when an authoritarian figure says, "Oh, yeah, I know that your shoes are pinching and I hear you, and here's who to blame for it."
Right.
Which is where we are right now,
Yeah.
I think. And the pinch, the pain is real. And I think that a lot of people are very frustrated when it seems like politicians either don't care or aren't listening or aren't responding. Um, so, what would happen if we rethought democracy and start from the fact that all of our shoes pinch? And also, all of us have aspirations, right? All of us suffer. All of us feel pain. All of us want to be happy. We share that. Um, if we build community spaces where we can connect and talk about, oh, wow, your shoe pinches too. I didn't realize that. Actually, wow, you're feeling something similar to me. Or you're feeling something really, really, really different from me, but you also hurt. Um, and you also want to be happy. And I want to be happy. And I want my family to be happy. And you want your family to be happy. And I want to have enough to eat. And I want the air to be clean. And I want a nice place for my children to play. And now we're talking about a space of community building, a space of opening into interdependence, that creates new, I think, political possibilities that are foreclosed by the political system that we have today. And that's really what I'm trying to do in the book, is to think about how can we build community spaces where people can come together and actually care for themselves and for each other and for the life that we share. Um, what that will result in, I don't know, actually. And I think that's one of the really beautiful things about, um, communities, is you don't know what we're capable of. I mean, humans are infinitely creative. And that's one of the really beautiful things about being alive, I think. So, what would happen if the person in the big house with the Democrat sign and the person in the trailer with the Republican sign actually came together as human beings and looked each other in the eyes and talked to each other? I don't know the answer to that. But I think that it might be really powerful. I have friends and neighbors who are very different politically than I am. But it's really powerful when we relate to each other just as human beings. It's really easy online to mistake a label for a person. So like whatever your political affinity is becomes your whole identity. But of course, that's not the case. We're so much richer and more expansive than these labels. Yeah.
Democracy starts when we stop living a lie.
Yeah. Yeah. And that lie is so present, isn't it? That like some people are, just because the where they were born or the color of their skin or the language they speak or their wealth, those people are somehow better and more worthy of care and respect than others. I feel like that's one of the great lies of the human experience. And some of the moments I go back to in American history that give me hope are moments when people um, stood up to that lie and called it out for being a lie. Yeah.
Is it a matter of not only bringing together but altering sort of how we teach democracy in schools and civic? And can you maybe give some insights on the book about how you would maybe revision that?
I think so. I think that the when we think about mindfulness as a practice of both like settling down and then seeing things deeply, one thing that's challenging I've found about teaching democracy to my students is that there's not much of a shared historical understanding right now. There were moments in our history where you could assume a certain literacy, and I can't assume that anymore. I asked my students this semester, I said, okay, 9/11, the war in Iraq, World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, put them in order. And they couldn't. All of them had Vietnam before World War II. And it was just, and I don't blame them. I mean, it's not their fault. I'm not sure where the knowledge, didn't get through, to them. And I know teachers are doing their absolute best, but I think that building a shared sense of history will be really important moving forward. And there are so many educators and organizations that are working hard. I mean, we had a meeting over lunch today talking about some of these organizations that are just doing fantastic work, recognizing that this is a real problem for us. So I think that's part of it. But I think that another challenge is that a lot of my students have grown up in the attention economy. They've grown up in the social media worlds. And so they don't really actually have good models of deliberation or even of debate. What they have are models of how people interact online. And I think that educators, we need to do a much better job of providing models of this is the way that you actually parse ideas in public with others. Just because someone says something does not make it inherently true. And what is something that's true? What is something that's false? How do we parse that together? How do we judge evidence? How do we engage each other in a way that's respectful, but still is engaging? I think that's something that we really need to do a better job with. But I'd be curious what you both think, kind of about that too.
Professor Lynn, any thoughts? The education.
No, I'm listening because that was actually one of the first questions that I wanted to ask Jeremy about, to get a sense of which courses at which levels that you integrate or specifically teach the information that you've included in this book. And I have to say, the example you gave of students not actually being that familiar with these times of tremendous war in our own history, that is pretty shocking. And it does speak to something that's been missing apparently for at least 3 generations of students. So if you're comfortable, if you could speak a little bit to which courses at which levels of the curriculum that you may or may not integrate your material into the coursework itself.
Yeah. So I routinely teach a number of different classes. I get the chance to teach first-year students often, and that is the perfect place, I think, actually, to introduce them to some of the concepts in this book, introduce them to some of the foundations of a mindfulness practice, introduce them to, you know, what it means to begin to recognize our interdependence or our interconnectedness, both with other people and with the earth itself. And then to begin to introduce them to some of the, more mindful and compassionate ways of engaging with each other as citizens. And I've found that the students at that level are very responsive. They care really deeply. A lot of them do, and that's really encouraging.
Yes.
I also think a lot of them have become comfortable outsourcing the act of thinking to AI. And I don't think that they would recognize it in that way exactly. But that's what they're doing. Is anytime they're asked to think about something, they'll often pull up, Chat GPT or whatnot. And so we'll think together about what that means and also like what the importance of thinking is. And then I teach a large lecture class on propaganda. And that is a really interesting class to teach, especially right now, because we're just bombarded with propaganda. And part of what I do in that class is to try to recuperate some of the historical perspective that the students have lost. And so we'll talk a little bit about propaganda historically and actually where it comes from and look at different kinds of propaganda across time. With an eye towards students recognizing the way that propaganda that they live today perpetuates enemyship and perpetuates this idea of a great lie that I talk about in the book. And I'll introduce those concepts to the class, to the students, and they seem to find them really useful, actually. And I do start most classes with some sort of a grounding, centering practice for at that level, at all the levels, really. I also teach a class on communication ethics, which is a more of a senior level class, and that's a class where we'll really dig into the issues of what does it mean to debate and deliberate and how to be a citizen um, and that's a fun class actually to begin to get into the way that we talk about the different pathways into interdependence, which is something that I'll do with the students as well. And then at the graduate level, we can talk both, at the level of introducing concepts to students, but we can talk more at a level of also like, how do you teach these things to people? So I've had a lot of success actually with engaging students around some of those, some of the ideas in the book.
It sounds like you have, and that you've done a beautiful job of just working with students where they are. So, as a kind of follow-up to that, I imagine that you get students in your first year, among your first year students, but also probably throughout your curriculum and in the undergraduate level, that you have students who are not communications majors. And I wondered to what extent you had students who maybe were poli-sci majors, political science majors, and if they present different teaching, I don't want to say challenges, but opportunities to reach a different audience and to find different ways to reach those students.
Absolutely. I love teaching. I love it. It's one of my favorite things that I do in life. And I try to approach the classroom in the spirit of the book, that we're talking about today, a spirit of generosity, a spirit of curiosity. Um, and I love when I have a class that is made up of people from across the university, because then we have the building blocks of, a really interesting, inclusive, diverse community.
Yes.
And one of the things that I do with all of my classes is so in the book I talk about the 5 guidelines of mindful deliberation, and those are things I've developed over the past 20 years, and I present them to my students, and we spend a couple of days talking about them and what they mean, and then I ask my students to sign them, and to agree that for the course of the semester they're going to do their best to abide by those agreements. And then we'll come back to them when there's moments, during the class that get tense or, whatnot. But I love, you mentioned political science students. I do get a lot of political science students in my classes. I get a lot of students from the business college actually in my classes, and engineering
Wow.
as well, and a lot of pre-law students, which makes sense in rhetoric classes, and it's fantastic because everyone brings a slightly different knowledge base, and of course different experiences. And so I work really hard in the classroom to try to create space where students can share their unique perspectives, and I'll throw a question out to the class and I'll say, okay, those of you who are studying business, how do you approach this question? What do you do with it? What pops in your head when you hear it? Okay, now those of you who are studying engineering, what do you do with this question? How does it, what does it inspire for you? Those of you who are pre-law, those of you who are in biology. One student I remember from last semester was a dancer. And it was really cool to see his perspective on things because it was completely different than others. He was thinking about the, kinesiology of a lot of things. And so that is just wonderful. And students respond to that. I mean, how rare is it that someone in a community space says to you, what do you think? And then everyone actually listens. If we did that more, we would have healthier, stronger communities, I think.
Yes. Has in your own discipline, your presentations at conferences, maybe inside or even outside of your field, have you found a warm receptivity to what you're bringing, the uniqueness of what you bring, and the depth of what you bring?
Yes and no, I
Okay.
think. I think that academics are taught to be very critical and skeptical of everything, which I appreciate to a certain extent, for sure. And so I think that there are some people who are deeply, deeply invested in studying democracy as a political party system. And so I think it's often hard for them to hear what I'm saying because it feels like it's so far out of left field. But I think the majority actually of people are really quite curious and interested. But you also have I think it's probably something you all have, talked with others about on the podcast before. Mindfulness, spirituality has become big business in the world, right? And so I think there's a real skepticism amongst academics, especially, but maybe beyond that too, of what people call like Mick mindfulness or commodified mindfulness, mindfulness that's basically used in the service of propping up a capitalist economy. And I can tell you that a lot of academics, the moment I say mindfulness, they hear that. And so I feel like a lot of the work that I have to do, at least initially, is to say, oh, I completely understand your criticisms of that. And I'm critical of that as well. But there's something deeper and richer. There's a richer tradition and a much richer practice tradition that I'm invoking with my work. And usually once we have that moment of realization together, things go a lot better. So yeah, I don't know. Is that a theme that's come up in the podcast? I'm sure.
I don't know that it has. Mike can speak to that, but I was sensitive to it because at one point, probably 30 years ago, I wanted to teach a course on the psychological aspects of spirituality,
Oh,
and to
wow.
take that at a very high level, and to stay away from the religious aspects, but to take the psychological components, let's say. And I had a wonderful department, so they were, I think there were a couple eyes raised, but I was able to put that course together and teach that course. But I found that that this subject was controversial because some students actually would go to their minister or priest and basically asking some permission to, was this okay to take this course? And the answer sometimes was no, that they didn't think it was okay. And so the students would, occasionally reluctantly come to me and apologize, but say that they had to withdraw from the course early on because of that. So I wondered if you might face some of those same kinds of challenges in terms of combining mindfulness with, the political sphere.
Yeah, I think that I feel like mindfulness has become generally pretty acceptable in university contexts, and usually it's the more secular version of mindfulness, which is fine, completely fine. I think good mindfulness teachers are comfortable teaching in different vocabularies. So I'm perfectly comfortable teaching in a more secular vocabulary, acknowledging the deep historical and religious roots of the practice, which is, I think, really important. But in general, no. I mean, I haven't had any problems with proposing classes related to mindfulness, and I don't know if that's just my university, but there are mindfulness centers at you know most of the Big Ten universities have really good mindfulness centers, and uh, so I think that might be something that shifted a little bit culturally. Yeah, very interesting.
Well, and I think you've done a beautiful job in your book of anchoring it, of anchoring it in something that is very present, very prominent now for people. And you've done it very methodically. You've been very meticulous in how you've gone about integrating that in a real life way. And so I think that too is part of people's openness to it. So congratulations on that. But I want to circle back because Mike might have some thoughts there about that notion of mindfulness being integrated into things at large.
Oh, well, there was an episode a while back with Mo Edjalali talking about bringing he's like an open source computer guy, and bringing those sorts of insights into the mindfulness community as opposed to what you characterized as McMindfulness. And that sort of touched on an idea about it's not really, I think, a focus of your book, but if the structure of democracy can be altered a little bit with some insights that have come more recently to facilitate or cultivate sort of more of the interdependence. And I wondered if you had any ideas about whether more parliamentary systems of democracy based upon more consensus, or maybe, or have more of a or facilitate more what you're promoting than maybe a two-party system, or if you thought of that, or if there could be any structural changes. And I realize this is, a constitutional question. So, but I just couldn't help thinking, since we're declaring a new interdependence, if we could maybe bring some insights that with new technology that's occurred that would facilitate more of the aspirations that you're pointing towards.
Yeah, I mean, it sure seems like a parliamentary system would allow for a diversity of voices, at least in a way that, is really kind of shut down, I think, often in our politics. You know, One of the real challenges, I think, is, in a state like Pennsylvania, where I live, a heavily gerrymandered state, such that, a candidate can enter a primary and win 9% of the vote, and then go on to a general election as the candidate and win an election, maybe often as the only candidate that's on the ballot altogether. Um, you know, that's not really a system that represents people on the ground. And so I was listening to someone earlier today talk about the importance of what she was calling open primaries, which I think is what they have in California, where it's not there's not a Democratic or a Republican primary, but instead all candidates are in the primary together, and you have to get 50% of the vote in order to go on to the next phase of the election. Is that a small? I mean, that's probably not a small change. Actually, it's probably a really big change that both political parties would resist, like with everything that they have.
Right.
But a change that I feel like probably would make a difference. Yeah, when it comes to how do you change something that has developed over the last 100 years and become accepted as the only way that things can be? And there's such powerful entrenched interests in keeping things the way that they are. I don't know how we do that on the big level, but I feel like it's got to start on the local grassroots level, and really like refocusing on um, the kinds of ways that the shoes are pinching in our local communities, and then coming together to build communities in order to address that. And maybe there's a way that local change can ripple outwards. I'm not sure, but I feel like there are good constitutional scholars out there who are thinking a lot about what would it mean to actually have a more democratic system. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, you have to start at the grassroots, and to be fair to everyone, it seems that again, I'm not. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but that I remember back when there were the beginnings of this sort of movement that were very grassroots, and this is the movement. I mean, the current political power structure started from the grassroots as well.
Yeah.
And so even though you don't necessarily like it, it's something that is a part of us in our community. And I often think that this sort of rampant consumerism, and this is what it's manifested into in full bloom in sort of the where you try to get endless sort of acquisition, and I mean, this is what you get. I mean, if this is what you've been groomed for in your society. So I mean, I agree with you that cutting that off and bringing something more toward realizing that that's not going to create something that is for your heart anyway. To show people that just acquiring things and consumer and building things and endless acquisition isn't going to get anywhere.
Yeah, I
And
think it's such a,
yeah,
the 250th anniversary of the Declaration could be, I'm pretty convinced it's not going to be, at least on the national level, but wouldn't it be great if, we had the people who were in charge of the commemorations said, this is a really opportune moment for us as a culture to talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What does it mean to live a good life? What is liberty or freedom, and why does it matter? And what does it mean to actually be happy? Um, and, accumulating endless, things doesn't fill the hole in our hearts that our lack of connection to other people and to the earth has produced. They just built in the little town where I live, not very far. I ran by it yesterday on a little jog. They just built a storage center, and it's like just a storage center for people who have so much stuff in their houses that there's not enough space for it anymore, and they need an additional space to. And I'm not judging people at all. I mean, that's you know you go online today and it's like a big mall, basically. It's just like everybody's selling you stuff all the time, everywhere. And, but does it really actually make us happy? So I think that this anniversary is a really important moment for us to think deeply about what is a good life? Many different ways to live a good life, not just one. But let's think about it together. And let's think about the importance of freedom, because one way to respond to the shoe pinching is to give all of your authority, like give all of your power over to an authoritarian leader who's going to do something about it. But if you do that, you're sacrificing freedom. And I think that becomes another argument for democracy, is it's a way of us to address shared suffering while maintaining freedom. And then again, like, what really makes us happy? I know I'm happiest when I'm with people, talking with them, connecting to them, and experiencing life together. So, yeah.
Well, I have high hopes for your work. You've done a marvelous job. It's a beautiful book, and I would hope that somehow there might be a grassroots effort. So I'm a little more optimistic, maybe, than Mike is.
Oh well, it's okay. I didn't mean to be
No,
not
no,
optimistic.
no, no. I'm just saying I'm a little more optimistic. Maybe as I've been reading your book, I've been remembering the consciousness raising groups of the '60s.
Sure.
And those were grassroots. Those were, in the beginning, largely women meeting and doing the best that they could in a grassroots fashion to follow kind of these loose consciousness raising group rules. And out of that came tremendous change. Now I'm not, before you worry, Mike, that I've become too Pollyannish. I have not. I know that we are living in a different world now, that different rules apply. But I could easily see you've done such a marvelous job with this book of laying out the case, and it is now very, very timely. And I could easily see that with the help of people where there are some footholds in particular states, that they could take this opportunity to really promote the processes that are outlined in your book. I think that they're very persuasive. And if you're reaching first year students and you're reaching undergraduates from different academic disciplines, different majors, and you're also reaching people at graduate levels, then there's something very powerful that's being offered to them. And so I'm a little hopeful. I'm a little hopeful.
I think it's good to be hopeful. Hopeful is hope's a practice, and I think that one of the best things we can do is not to give in to nihilism, or defeatism. Cornel West, whose work I really love, he talks about hope on a tightrope, and it's like a balance. You're about to fall off all the time, and so I keep I was talking about this in LA. I was there last week. I keep a hope journal, actually, like things that give me hope. And it's both, things like the consciousness raising movement that you talked about, historical moments when people really did do something that brought about change in the world. And I've been really encouraged by the fact that people are, kind of already beginning to build some community working groups around the book, and using the book as an opportunity to connect and build beloved community. And so I don't know, it's, there's a lot of mud right now. So what are we going to grow from it?
No mud, no lotus, right? One of your
That's
chapters in the
right.
book.
Yeah.
Well, Jeremy, when you decide to run for office, Lynn and I are going to be on the campaign. Just let me know.
Absolutely. Count me in. Count me in.
I did not see that happening.
Speaking of the 60s, do you remember the old Schoolhouse Rock or the commercial about rocking and a rollin', splishing and splashing over the horizon? What can it be? Looks like it's going to be a free country and no more kings, no more kings. That's from your. Don't you all remember this?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Because I'm going to take the fifth because
I thought this was part of your focus group in the 60s. They came up with little slogans to, the little kids like me that were being educated on democracy with the No More Kings and what the Declaration of Independence was about.
Now you're going to test my memory cells. I can remember some of the slogans and some of the songs, some of which are not appropriate for this.
Oh, that's funny. We'll have to look those up. I bet they live on YouTube now.
Probably. I bet they do.
I'm just a Bill.
Yep, I remember.
I remember that. I remember that too. Yes.
Oh, that's like. So you're going to be a law someday, at least. I'm stopping. I
love this, Mike.
You do. Yeah, you should do a Schoolhouse Rocks episode. That'd be amazing.
Now that you've suggested it, he will.
I love it.
So Jeremy, anything you'd like to end on about what you have going on in the future, how people can connect with you and your programs, or get the book and start their own programs and do stuff like that?
Yeah, I started a Substack called Zen and the Art of Democracy, so I've been posting there, and that's a pretty nice platform for connecting with people, and people are always certainly will, I'm open to getting emails and talking about that. And, so you all can put my email address with the podcast. And, but yeah, if you get the book, let me know what you think. And if there's ways that I can help, if you want to, actually begin to put some of the ideas in the book into practice, I'm really happy to do that. There probably will be some retreats later this year. We're working on that right now.
Good.
No final details yet, but it's something that I'm excited about, and I think that's one of the directions I see things going, is actually doing some more in-person retreats and community building together, and taking some of these ideas out of the classroom and out of the book and into the world and putting them into practice together. Yeah.
Wonderful. Sounds wonderful.
Well, Jeremy, I'll be happy to pick the plums off the Plum Village trees with you anytime you
Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's so great to meet both of you, and this was a wonderful conversation.
Oh, it was on our side as well.